Well, I think the dark times are here for us Jurassic Park fans. Dominion's been delayed, won't even start shooting again till July. Jurassic World Evolution is still dormant, and Camp Cretaceous looks like shit. You know what? It's bad enough that we're stuck in quarantine. Why put myself in this position when I could easily be reviewing a game? Especially on Jurassic Park's 27th anniversary. So fuck it, let's review a Jurassic Park game. Telltale Games is a game development company that is known for their choose-your-own-adventure-esque type of games, where you're able to choose the actions of your characters that will eventually lead them through a chain of events in which you have to make more decisions and actions that will bring you to a specific ending caused by those decisions and actions that you made for that character of the story. A very interesting concept, but sadly Telltale Games shut down in 2018. But at least we have all of their games to remember them by. These games are usually centered around more mainstream movies and TV shows, including Back to the Future, Guardians of the Galaxy, and my personal favorite, The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead game is actually the first Telltale game that I've ever played, and it's what got me interested in the company and their work in the first place. But I didn't know they had made a game that was more up my alley. That's right, Telltale Games actually made a Jurassic Park game, and I'm going to review it for you today. Now, while I do have a little bit of a history with this game, I didn't even really find out about it until another dinosaur YouTuber by the name of The Gaming Beaver uploaded his playthrough of it in 2016, which was about 5 years after the game's initial release. Ever since watching the beginning of that playthrough, I wanted to try the game out for myself, but there was one problem. I didn't have any game consoles at the time, but I did eventually find an alternative way to play it when I got myself a cheap laptop that was specifically meant for school purposes. It didn't even dawn on me to even search for the game until one of my friends at the time mentioned a platform by the name of Steam. I didn't know what Steam was at that point, so naturally I told him that if his computer was steaming, he should probably get it checked out. Anyways, I searched the game, saw it was there, and bought it. Surprisingly, I was able to play the whole game with little to no problems at all, which, if you saw the kind of laptop I had, you'd be surprised as well. And after playing the game in its fullest, I had to admit it was pretty fun. Then I forgot the password to my original Steam account, Steam refused to let me in, and I lost the game and the $20 I had spent on it. But I got to play the game fully, and that was enough for me, until a few years later when I managed to get my hands on all of the proper equipment to actually record gameplay of it, specifically for this video. And at the time I had a PS3 and I was planning on buying it digitally, but after checking the PS Store, I found out it's not there anymore. Then I checked Steam, they didn't have it either. These were the only two platforms that I had, and I had planned to buy it digitally, so I didn't really know where else I could go to get it. Initially, I thought it was because maybe Telltale Games had pulled the plug on all of their digital versions of their games since they were being shut down, which would explain how I ended up getting the game for this review, because I did end up getting a hard copy version of the game. But I had to get it for the Xbox version. And I had to play it on my brother's console, because he has an Xbox One. Because he's in denial about the ultimate power the PS4 holds and how it will eventually get him to conform to our side. I'm just kidding, both consoles are great, I like them both. But anyways, I have the game, so I guess all we have to do now is review it. So, let's go ahead and take a look at Jurassic Park the game. So as y'all probably know, Jurassic Park the game is divided into 4 episodes. And today, I'm going to go through all of these episodes, starting with the first one, The Intruders. This game begins with a random woman running through the woods, obviously being pursued by dinosaurs. We're kind of just thrown into the game, so we don't actually know what's going on, who the woman is, what dinosaur she's being chased by, and so on. Immediately, there's already something about the game that I really like, which is the overall tone of the game. Being chased in the jungle in the middle of the night by an unknown creature is something that sounds pretty terrifying. And this sets up the tone that we'll see in and out of the game, and to me it's pretty effective. It feels like the developers were trying to utilize the tone in a different way. Even though the original movie is considered a dark sci-fi thriller, the way the game is portrayed feels different, and more horror related at times, which isn't bad. To me it just feels like a different take on Jurassic Park, and while I haven't always been open to that idea, I now welcome it, since it means not using the same idea over and over again, and I like this take on Jurassic Park. Anyways, one thing that you do know about the woman is that she has the Barbasol canister from the original movie, which indicates that she's somehow involved with Dennis Nedry. You eventually take over as the woman, kind of. You're really taking over her actions and decisions that she makes. While she's running in this scenario, your job is to basically press whatever button the game throws at you, as pressing the correct button with a fast enough reaction will make it so she doesn't die. If you press the wrong button, or don't press the button fast enough, you fail whatever task she was doing, and as a result she could die by getting eaten by the dinosaurs. But you eventually make it to a cliff where you have no choice but to jump so you can get away from the dinosaurs. Once you make it down, you make your way to the road where a speeding Jeep Wrangler drives towards you at an incredible speed, when all of a sudden, we're hit with a title card and credits. And as much as I want to include it, I can't play the awesome intro song, which is just the original theme from the Jurassic Park film. We then cut to earlier that day where we're introduced to Jerry Harding and his daughter Jess. That may sound like a familiar name to most of you, and that's because this Jerry Harding is based off the one from the movie. The Jerry Harding from the Jurassic Park movie was also a chief veterinarian, but despite that he played a minor role in the film. In the game, however, he plays as one of the lead characters, which I feel like is a callback to the Jurassic Park novel, as that Harding played a much bigger role in that as well than his movie counterpart. And another great thing about this game is the amount of continuity it manages to keep up with. Even in terms of the characters and their backstories, they're pretty much in line with that of the original film. Yeah, the appearance of Jerry Harding between the two platforms may be different, but that's really the only thing. We later learn in the game during an argument with his daughter that he's been married multiple times, with one of those marriages resulting in another daughter aside from Jess. And you guessed it, that other daughter is none other than Sarah Harding. Jerry is showing his daughter around the park, to which she absolutely enjoys. I mean, who wouldn't? You're in a park with actual live dinosaurs. That's amazing. At this point, she wants to actually see the dinosaurs, so we spend this part of the game actually viewing the inside of the Triceratops enclosure, which is a nice way of foreshadowing certain events that'll take place later in the game. For example, as we're searching for the Trikes, we run into the emergency shed, which is in the area where the T-Rex vs Triceratops fight will eventually take place. Once we actually find the Triceratops, the discovery's short-lived, since Jerry wants to call things early so that Jess can catch the boat in time to head back to the mainland. Turns out this is Jess's last night here, and as much as she wants to stay, her dad needs to get back to work so that they're a step closer to opening the park to the public. We cut to later that night where we meet up with Miles Chadwick, which was Nedry's contact that many speculate to be the guy he's talking to in the webcam in the original film. He's also mentioned earlier during the conversation between Nedry and Dodgson. Anyways, Miles is not alone, as he mentions to Dodgson over the phone that if Nedry doesn't show up, he's got a backup plan, which is the woman who we saw running away from the mysterious dinosaurs in the beginning of the game. Her name is Niemeyer, and her job is to basically escort Miles through the Nublar jungles to retrieve the Barbasol canister that Nedry failed to bring. And that's our mission. We take control of Niemeyer, sneak our way into the park, and eventually find Nedry's Jeep. We of course make the discovery that Nedry is dead and doesn't have the canister. From here you have to search the area for clues as to where the canister is. Even though you kind of already have an idea, the game cleverly utilizes certain things to help you complete this task. For example, using the lights on the Jeep to point out clues that you didn't notice before because it was too dark to see. From there you can see both Nedry's and the dinosaur footprints, showing that not only did he leave the Jeep, but he was being stalked as well. I kind of got stuck through this mission because I kind of forgot what the game was trying to get you to do to find the canister, as missions like these use more complex methods to complete them. Rather than you just finding the canister, you have to do specific things that will eventually lead up to that discovery. What you have to do is you have to go to the Jeep where Miles is looking for the canister, convince him to let you have a look, and once you take over, you're given the option to point out certain things in the Jeep. You're supposed to point out the soda can that's next to Nedry's body so Niemeyer can use it as a comparison to the canister that Nedry clearly dropped. Niemeyer then drops the soda can where it rolls downhill like the canister did in the movie. Once the can reaches the bottom of the hill, she can now get an idea as to where the canister is. And she ends up being correct as she finally finds the canister. But she also gets the car running and gets it pulled away from the log it was stuck on and pretty much kills Miles with it. I'm just kidding, sadly. Miles manages to get out of the way in time. Idiot! But they've got bigger problems now. Well, they're pretty small, but there's a lot of them. So the two are surrounded by Dilophosaurs, only for Miles to be the coward that he is and pushes Niemeyer towards the pack so that he can get away, but is immediately taken down by one of them and is eaten alive. From here you take over as Niemeyer, and you have to make your way to the car and dodge Dilo attacks. Eventually you get back to the car and you're able to actually start it and drive it, only to crash it almost immediately. And you're forced to make your way on foot. But you're stopped by a Dilo, and just when it's about to get you, it's driven away from the strange calls of the mysterious dinosaurs that we heard in the beginning of the game. Then Niemeyer, who takes the canister back from Miles, who took it earlier, is all of a sudden bitten by one of the dinosaurs. And when she turns back at the jungle, it's no surprise why she decides to book it, and this starts off the segment that we were introduced to in the beginning of the game. From here we cut back to Jerry and his daughter, as they try to make their way to the boat on time for Jess to board and head back to the mainland. It's here where the two start having conversations that give us a bit more information on their backstories, which is not the most interesting thing you want to see in a game, but story-wise it helps fill in the gaps for our characters and their backgrounds. Anyways, we learn Jess is a kleptomaniac and takes Spanish classes. Amazing gameplay, 10 out of 10, would listen to again. All of a sudden we find out we're the Jeep that almost hits Nina in the beginning as she comes out of nowhere forcing Jerry to stop. Also, because I wasn't fast enough to press a button to stop in time, I actually did end up hitting Niemeyer with the Jeep, but we don't talk about that. Anyways, due to this current issue, we're forced to head back to the visitor center to get Nima some proper help, and Jerry trusts Jess to drive them back, as we take over as Jerry to try to give some medication to Nima from the first aid kit. During all of this, you see that she's clearly delusional and acting very strange, which Jerry thinks may be a result of the bite wound, which may contain some sort of toxin. This will be important for later. Then the three are stopped, as they're being blocked by one of the Triceratops from earlier. In case you couldn't already tell from the whole Nedry scenario, the park is offline at this point, so dinosaurs are loose and shit, wreaking havoc and killing everyone, especially this little cutie. Just look how dangerous she is. A true killer. But yeah, the stubborn trike just refuses to let go of its food and move back into its enclosure, and since the gate is locked in the open position, Jerry has to unlock it and close it manually. Also, Jess gets to pet the Triceratops. Lucky bitch. We now have to go to the maintenance shed to unlock the gate from the open position, then find a way to get the trike away from her food. I like these parts of the game because you kinda have to experiment with the options that you're given. You could do things like shine the light and honk the horn at the trike, only for it to be temporarily annoyed by it, and go back to eating. You can't just take the plant away from her, and you obviously can't try to move her into the enclosure yourself, so what you're supposed to do is honk the horn so that she's distracted by the sound, then shine the lights into her eyes while she's facing the car. This is enough for her to back away from the plant, which you then take and throw back into the enclosure, which the trike follows. But of course she doesn't go in without a struggle, and when Jess tries to honk the horn to get the trike fully back into her enclosure, the trike roars in distress, which doesn't make the much bigger trike too happy. In fact, she comes charging full speed at the gate, breaking it down on Jerry. And because the horn is now jammed and Jess can't get it to stop, the big trike, also known as Lady Margaret, charges for the Jeep and just completely demolishes it. Now this all looks very intense and stressful. It would be a shame if a T-Rex were to all of a sudden come onto the scene and make things even harder for our characters. Oh, speak of the devil. Rexy decides to make an entrance, and we're greeted to a pretty epic fight between the T-Rex and the Triceratops, which you, as Jerry, have to run through to get to the Jeep where Nima and his daughter are stuck in. Given you don't die in the process and actually make it to the Jeep, you're able to get Jess out, where she stupidly runs towards the middle of the fight in an attempt to get to the maintenance shed. You take over as Jess because God knows you can't trust her to keep herself alive, the one job she's given to do, so you have to take over so she properly dodges the T-Rex and makes it to the maintenance shed alive. I did a good job getting Jess to the maintenance shed, which is more than I could say for Jerry. Don't worry, I was able to get it the second time around. But from there, the fight continues as we bunker down for the night. Jerry finds a trank gun and posts himself by the door till morning, where he wakes up to see the aftermath of the battle. While the danger is temporarily gone, they still have to find their way back to the visitor center to get Nima some help. Luckily, they're being watched through the cameras by unknown people who have the great idea of sending a Ford Explorer down to where they're at to send them to the visitor center. From here, Nima becomes even more delusional, showing that her state is worsening. Eventually, they make it back to the visitor center, but before they go in, we pan up to see the helicopter that took our original characters off the island in the movie fly off, not realizing they had left others behind, and showing that as their adventure ends, ours is just beginning. They go inside where they see the aftermath of the events that took place in the original film. As you can already tell from the wreckage, this is after the Velociraptor vs T-Rex encounter, but of course they don't know that. It's at this point where Jerry finds a radio and is finally able to talk to the people that helped them out earlier. We find out it's Dr. Laura Sorkin, which is someone who actually plays a big role in the Jurassic universe but isn't seen at all throughout the franchise. Her character is utilized in this game, where she's able to help them with Nima's injury, since she knows what's going on. Jerry's directed to give Nima a small dose of a powerful tranquilizer to counter the toxins. He decides to use the tranq darts from the gun, but he left them in the car. Jess is quick to volunteer to get them, and as soon as she goes outside, we're greeted to a pretty intense and suspenseful trip to the car, as at this point we don't know what is or isn't near us. Jess successfully gets the darts and goes back inside, but that might have been the worst decision, as the T-Rex is just kind of magically in there now. Jess is knocked down to the ground by Rexy with the darts knocked away from her, so she now has to make her way towards them, which is a little hard when a 7-ton theropod is in your way. But you're able to switch to Jerry's character, who is on the second floor, and push his boxes down onto the ground to distract the T-Rex, but only temporarily. What you're supposed to do is have Jess move from pillar to pillar to get the T-Rex to be right under Jerry, so that he can push one of the boxes directly onto the T-Rex, which gets it distracted long enough for Jess to grab the darts and make her way upstairs, where Rexy just barely gets her. As Nima goes into convulsions, Jerry finally injects her with the tranquilizer, which immediately helps her. Once that problem is taken care of, they now have to figure out how to escape since the T-Rex is still there. So they decide to go out the windows and make their way to the roof, where Jess tumbles and almost falls off the building. Jerry gets down completely to help Jess, but that kind of backfires. Jess then falls onto the T-Rex and then onto the ground where she gets knocked out. Thinking quickly, Jerry grabs the trank gun from the car and fires at Rexy, causing her to retreat back into the building. That doesn't last long, but luckily Jerry still has the radio and is able to get Laura to distract the T-Rex with the Ford Explorer. And we all know how Rexy feels about Ford Explorers. With Rexy finally out of the way, you'd think the worst of it is over, but we're just beginning, as the first episode ends with Niemeyer deciding to hold Jerry and Jess at gunpoint and use them as hostages. Episode 2, The Cavalry, begins with a trio of mercenaries heading to Isla Nublar by helicopter on a rescue mission to retrieve the remaining survivors on the island. We're introduced to the other characters, Oscar and Yoder. Yeah, that's his actual name in the game. Oh, and the pilot, Decaf. Yeah, that's his nickname in the game. And he's not too important because, spoiler alert, he dies pretty soon here. Kind of, I guess. We'll get to that later. Anyways, they're basically the second team sent in, as we hear through the radio that the first one is already on the ground and searching through the visitor center, only to find a lot of wreckage and no survivors. They then hear the first team being under attack, so they speed their way towards that direction. Unfortunately, by the time they land the chopper and arrive at the center, the first team of mercenaries are already dead, with the discovery that most, if not all, were shot to death along with their chopper. We take over as Yoder during this investigation and find tracks and bullet shells. Eventually, we make our way up to the building, and once inside, we discover the damages that have been done by Rexy, but Jerry, Jess, and Niemeyer are nowhere to be found. But what we do find is this crazy dude from the first team, who is still alive and is so crazy that he's shooting at both Oscar and Yoder. We then take over as Oscar in another horror-induced sequence, where we not only have to watch out for Vargas, the crazy dude, but also the mysterious dinosaurs that we keep hearing throughout the game. Yoder uses the cameras to help us try to spot Vargas and shoot him down, and when we succeed, he's still alive but is clearly delusional, much like Niemeyer was after being bitten by this mysterious dinosaur. While Yoder wants to help Vargas, Oscar sees him as a lost cause. Yoder then goes through the footage of the security cameras to try to find where the survivors went, only to find out that one of them had led them out at gunpoint. They head back after hearing Vargas scream, and return to find him being dragged away by the dinosaurs. With that, the two finally head to the chopper so they could go back and track down the Hardings and Niemeyer. We then meet back up with them as they trek through the woods towards the north coast, but Niemeyer is still pretty weak from her wound, so they stop to take a break. From here, you need to try to find a way to get the radio from Niemeyer so you can contact the rescue team. But Niemeyer is the kind of person that gives no fucks at all, and will kill the both of them if she has to. So bringing up things that clearly make her angry in conversation is definitely a risk. But you're actually supposed to make her mad, which is the easiest job for a man to do. Jerry puts two and two together and assumes Niemeyer has a daughter, and judging from her reaction to you bringing that up, it seems that Jerry is correct. From here, you have to switch back to Jess, who grabs the radio while Niemeyer is distracted. While Niemeyer calms down, you, as Jess, make up some bullshit excuse to go into the woods and finally contact the team. You manage to tell Yoder that while you don't exactly know where you're at, that you're heading north and that Jerry had built a fire that they could spot from above. But you're eventually caught by Niemeyer, who decides it's time to continue north. We switch back to Yoder and Oscar, where they have to study the landscape to see if they could spot any smoke. Eventually they do, and as they're making their way towards that direction, a Pteranodon decides to just smack the helicopter out of nowhere.
Smack Cam! Bitch, I hope the fuck you do!
Which is enough to knock Decaf out and almost cause the helicopter to crash. Luckily, with our quick reaction and Yoder's cockiness, we're able to avoid dying once again, even with my absolutely shitty landing.
Can you fix it?
Yeah. Give me about a month.
Got an hour.
There's duct tape in the survival kit.
Why do they need duct tape? Don't they know flex tape fixes everything? Anyways, Oscar and Yoder follow the smoke and eventually find where the survivors had temporarily stopped. Yoder and Oscar stupidly yet unsurprisingly split up, and Yoder is attacked by Dilophosaur. While it almost gets us, since we're playing as Yoder, Oscar manages to step in at the last moment and properly kicks the shit out of it. And right as he goes to finish the kill, Yoder steps in to tell him that there's no need. The Dilo had obviously given up and backed down, and even though Oscar wants to kill it, Yoder convinces him that he already won the fight, and there was no need to. It actually says a lot about these two characters, with Oscar being more extreme and brutal, and Yoder being more level-headed. Sometimes they switch these character traits, which is a little out of place sometimes, especially with what happens later in the game, but we'll get to that in due time. For now, we have to meet back up with the Hardings and Niemeyer, who we learn was once familiar with the island before John Hammond had purchased it and changed it into a theme park. We learn this as Niemeyer constantly points out that she knows her way through the jungle, and even points out that there's an old goat trail they could use to get to the north coast. But she's pissed when she finds out that that ancient trail that had survived many things like storms and earthquakes is now replaced with a Jurassic Park theme ride. But don't worry, Niemeyer, you'll soon forget about that trail when you find out how many things are to actually do here. There's actually quite a bit you need to do, and it's divided into 4 areas. Since we can't use the goat trail, we have no choice but to use the ride to make our way down to the bottom of this cliff. But as Jerry mentioned earlier, the ride isn't ready, so it's up to you and your big brain to try to figure out how to get it fully functional. These have to be my favorite parts of the game because these parts make it feel like an actual game. You have to test out things around the area to see what does and doesn't work, and if it does, you have to see how it can be useful to you. For example, in one part the power to the ride is not on, so you need to go to the power box thingy over in the other area to get it turned on, but it's locked. You don't have any keys or tools to get the box open, but you do have a working crane. So once you get the doors out of the way, you can turn on the power and get the ride at least on. The next part takes a while, and it was a little challenging for me when I first played the game. You have to line the cars to the ride in a specific order, but you have to get all of these other non-rideable cars out of the way first, using this roundabout machine thing. After a while on that, you pretty much have the ride ready to go, and once you get started, you then have to deal with a new threat, Dinosaurs. This was actually a really fun sequence to watch, and one where you definitely needed to have a fast reaction since you're on a roller coaster. The game will throw button icons for you to press, and if you don't press them fast enough, surprise surprise, you die. It's actually pretty challenging. Well, challenging compared to everything else in this game. Luckily you get rid of these annoying little shits, but that won't stop you from falling to your death. But fortunately, Yoder and Oscar finally catch up to help you out, and finally subdue Niemeyer. As they head back to the helicopter, they find what's left of Decaf, and the chopper's still broken down. Yoder freaks out about this discovery, mainly with the fact that Oscar is quick to say that Decaf is dead, which seems weird because this is when Oscar seems to be the more rational and calm one, when he's usually more extreme. But whatever, we've got a T-Rex coming and the chopper needs tons fixed. This is one of those missions where it's timed, which is another upside to the gameplay because it offers more challenge and intensity to the game, which is pretty scarce when the game is primarily story and investigation than actual gameplay. So once you finally find the right battery for the chopper, you take off right before the T-Rex can take you down. Alright, 3 down, 2 more to go. Now it's time to head for Dr. Laura Sorkin and her assistant that we never meet. It doesn't matter, he ends up dying off screen before Yoder and Oscar can get to him. Anyways, being an animal activist and actually caring for the well-being of the dinosaurs, Dr. Sorkin refuses to leave the island, and her reasoning is that if she leaves, the lysine contingency will continue to go in full effect and kill off the dinosaurs. For those of you that don't know, the lysine contingency gene is a gene that Dr. Henry Wu added to all of the dinosaurs on the island, which is a gene modification that makes it so the dinosaurs are unable to create lysine, which is an amino acid that's essential to their bodies. Because of this, the dinosaurs now have to rely on lysine supplements to stay alive, that are provided to them by InGen employees. Without this supplement, the dinosaurs will die within a specific amount of time. This was created as a safety precaution in case any of the dinosaurs managed to get off the island and onto the mainland. If they did, they wouldn't last long, but this gene was completely forgotten in the franchise, but the game decides to give us a proper explanation as to why that is. Basically, because Laura truly does care about the well-being of these animals, she doesn't want them to die, and with nobody on the island to give them their lysine supplement, they're most certainly going to. So she decides to initiate her plan to release a supplement that counters this gene through the main waterways of the island so that all of the dinosaurs can drink from it. And while this is happening, Yoder and Oscar have to go back to Niemeyer, who was handcuffed in the helicopter, who is all of a sudden free and hijacking the chopper. Luckily, they managed to subdue her once again, but not without some damage to their only ride off the island. As they crash land, Jerry, Jess, and Laura are attacked by velociraptors, and just when it looks like they're safe, the chopper crashes into the tower they're stationed on, and that's where the episode ends. Episode 3 begins with Jerry, Jess, and Laura getting down from the tower and making a run for it towards the utility tunnels. Just as the raptors almost get to us, we make it just in time. We then go back to Yoder, who wakes up to the helicopter completely destroyed, but everyone alive, even though Niemeyer is unconscious. They manage to jump out the last second before the helicopter crashed, and while they're okay for now, they still have to figure out how they're gonna get off the island. Oscar and Yoder split up again, with Yoder staying behind at the crash site. He takes his time to rummage through Niemeyer's things and finds a Barbasol canister with the embryos inside it. We then go back to Oscar, who is in stealth mode and makes his way towards the utility tunnels. This part is actually pretty intense, and the fact that it only takes a few misclicks of buttons that are literally given to you to press, and maybe the easiest job in the game, is surprisingly still stress-inducing. Maybe that's my brain trying to find any sort of excitement in a game that doesn't really feel like a game. Anyways, Oscar, being the crazy bastard that he is, decides to follow behind the raptors in the utility tunnels. Anyways, we go back to Niemeyer, who wakes up from the crash to find that her Barbasol canister is missing. Yoder then reveals himself in a tree of all places to extract any information as to what the contents within the canister are and why Niemeyer has them. Niemeyer then spills the whole story and even tries to make a deal with Yoder. Even though I didn't really want it to happen, the game pretty much pushes you towards that direction of making a deal with Yoder, which is one of the things that this game failed at. It basically wants you to go towards a specific direction, so every choice you make is pretty much disregarded and will double back to go towards that specific direction. It just makes everything feel more limiting than they already are. I don't even have the choice to make a deal with Yoder or not. As that's happening, Jerry, Laura, and Jess make their way towards the aquatic exhibit since that's where Laura knows there's a working phone. As we venture through the tunnel system, Laura explains to Jess how the dinosaurs were created using frog DNA, and goes more in depth on her plan to stop the lysine contingency. This doesn't go over well with Jerry, who is completely against it since he makes the argument that that gene was used as a safety measure for the park. Jerry and Laura get into a debate over it, and while they both make good points, I have to side with the T-Rex that is now chasing Yoder and Niemeyer through the jungle. I know that was a shitty transition, deal with it. As they reach the utility tunnel, Niemeyer decides to head towards the enclosure where the Velociraptor is feeding on a dead Parasaurolophus, in the hopes that Rexy gets distracted by the raptor. She does, and even manages to kill it. But she still goes after Niemeyer, who is able to get away and make it to the tunnel, but is pissed when she finds out that Yoder dropped the embryos outside. Yoder gets bullied into going back out there to get them, and after sneaking towards it, he runs back, barely making it and saving the embryos. With the tunnels dark, the two try to get the lights on by messing with the power box, only to make things worse for Oscar, who was doing a good job following the pack of raptors stealthily, only to be spotted by one of them. But don't worry, Oscar is an actual badass, as this part of the game we take over and actually have to fight off the raptor with nothing more than a knife in our bare hands. Oscar punches and even eventually kills the raptor. I will admit this part was more difficult to pull off, but I had fun doing it nonetheless. Yoder and Niemeyer meet back up with Oscar right after he finishes a kill. Yoder fills Oscar in on the deal he made with Niemeyer, where they would meet up with Niemeyer's contact after they finished everything here to get the money, and in return they would get half of whatever Niemeyer makes from the embryos. You get to choose whether or not you're down with this deal, and I chose the more honorable way and turned it down. What can I say, I'm an honest dude. At this point, Jess thinks it's an appropriate time for a smoke break using cigarettes that she stole from Laura, but a nicotine-addicted Velociraptor comes out of nowhere and demands for a cigarette. Jess is so compliant she gives the raptor the whole pack. But the raptor, just following its basic instincts, still hunts Jess down, and when the whole pack catches up, Jess goes full GTA and starts running them over with a forklift. As the three make a run for it, Oscar jumps out of nowhere and slices out one of the raptors, giving it a pretty nasty gash on its face. This makes the raptors actually fear Oscar to the point where they actually run away. Oscar is just a human version of King Kong. As everybody finally regroups, Laura points out that they have a new problem. Oh goody. Turns out, with the random steaming coming from the tunnels and the flickering lights, there seems to be a problem with the island's geothermal power plant. A pretty big problem, you know, the exploding kind. They now have to make their way towards the plant where Laura suspects Jess took the cigarettes, to which Jess fully admits to it. This makes Jerry really angry and a whole fight breaks out between the two that's actually painful to watch. So much so I actually took my headset off when it came to this part. It was just extremely annoying to me. Whatever, they get to the power plant, we do a bunch of random boring shit that I'm not even gonna bother explaining. Long story short, they get the power plant problem fixed, but the emergency lockdown is initiated as a result. And as the doors are about to close, the last three raptors make it into the room. Everyone makes their way to the second floor, but with the only panel that can unlock the doors down at the first floor with the raptors, they're stuck there. But Oscar, being the good guy that he is, volunteers to go towards that panel to unlock the emergency lockdown system, even though his chances of surviving are very low. He decides to do it anyways and is a complete badass, who despite doing his best and powering through the pack, and even managing to unlock the doors, the raptors sadly get the best of him and finally take him down. It's actually a pretty sad moment, as Oscar was really an awesome character, and one that actually took a raptor down. I mean, who else has done that? Oh, right. The rest of the group make their escape despite their loss. This hits Yoder especially hard, as him and Oscar had been partners and even friends for years. And it doesn't make things better when they finally find a place to get away from the raptors, only to discover a very disturbing sight. The body of Yoder's other friend, Decaf, who despite his condition is actually alive. Laura points out that this is the last stage of the venom for the mysterious dinosaur that had bitten Niemeyer earlier. The venom makes you go into a comatose state, keeping you paralyzed but alive and fresh, so that the dinosaurs can make a nest out of you. They discover this is the case when Jerry pulls out an actual egg from Decap's abdomen. Everyone learns that Laura knew about this dinosaur all along, and on top of everything else, this sets off Yoder, who had already blamed Laura for Oscar's death. He gets so mad, he even threatens to kill her. Episode 4, the survivors start where we left off, with Yoder wanting to kill Laura. Luckily, we talk some sense into him and calm him down for now. But during that whole debacle, Laura reveals a pretty important piece of information, which is revealing what the mysterious dinosaur is. This dinosaur is called the Troodon, and for most of you, this isn't new information because this dinosaur is a fan favorite within the Jurassic Jurassic Park fanbase. And if you haven't seen it in the game here, then you've surely seen it throughout social media. Anyways, these little bastards are the reason Decap is in this state, and if the group doesn't hurry, they'll be in the same condition. They have to find their way out of the room before the pack of Troodons make it in there, and luckily Jerry breaks the lock on a grate that leads them towards where they need to go. They're still planning on heading towards the marine exhibit since again that's where Laura said the phones were working. But getting there may be easier said than done because we're now stuck at a point in the game where we once again have to study our surroundings. But this time it's different. We're lost in the tunnels, but we know we're at an intersection, and looking through the blueprints, Laura mentions that there are only 4 intersections throughout the tunnel system. We have to try to distinguish which tunnel we're in by pointing out certain things like pipes, water tanks, ladders, and directions. But sadly, doing this whole thing is actually pointless, because once we're done, Yoder lights a flare that we found in the room before this and discovers a whole pack of Troodons following them in the darkness. I know I'm going through this fast, but I'm skipping a lot of this for the sake of time. That whole tunnel intersection sequence took much longer to complete than I'm making it seem like. And it just sucks to see all that time go into absolutely nothing. But going back to the Troodons, we're forced to split up, with Jerry and Niemeyer going down one tunnel and Jess, Yoder, and Laura going down another. Jerry and Niemeyer make it to a ladder that leads to the outside. Niemeyer points out that Yoder and the rest of them went down the corridor that led to the marine exhibit, so all they needed to do is to go straight there. This is when we're given some exposition from Niemeyer and her familiarity with the island. Turns out her and her tribe lived here when she was a young girl, and when InGen purchased the island they relocated her and her family with the promise of housing, medicine, and education. But of course those promises were broken, and they spared every ounce of expense they could to her and her tribe. After the story, a Ford Explorer that has clearly seen better days comes out of nowhere announcing that it's making a stop at the marine exhibit. We then cut back to the rest of the survivors just barely making it away from the Troodons. At this point we know they're at least near the exhibit when we see large tanks of feeder fish, enough meant to feed a very large animal. The rest of the group finally meet up with Jerry and Niemeyer, but they find out that the phones are actually not working after all. This makes Yoder even more irritated, especially since he knows they don't have a whole lot of time before the game decides to honor the Jurassic Park novel by doing what the film didn't. Yoder admits that they needed to get off the island as quickly as possible because the military is planning on bombing the island. Because things didn't go as planned, Yoder needs to make a call to give them more time, before they all go down with it. This makes Laura pissed, so much so she ditches the rest of the group to go down to the rotunda, the control room located at the bottom of the lagoon the Mosasaurus is housed in. After exploring our surroundings once again to find a cleverly hidden code for the keypad that opens the elevators, we finally make our way down to the control room where Jerry tries to reason with Laura. Her plan from here is to call InGen to get a hold of Hammond to try to stop the bombing from killing her dinosaurs. When that fails, she locks everyone in and holds them hostage. When that doesn't work either and is even hung up on, she unleashes her full Karen powers and decides to release the Mosasaurus out of its enclosure and into the ocean. You never hang up on a Karen. But releasing the Mosa was a pretty bad decision that cost her life. Nobody really cares and Yoder makes his call, where it's revealed that they have 90 minutes to get off the island before it gets blown up. Luckily for them, there's a boat on the dock that I think was left behind by the contact, but they're going to use it as their way to get out of there. Or at least just Yoder and Niemeyer, because for whatever reason he wants to continue his plan without them. I guess because he kind of almost gave themselves away earlier, but then Niemeyer admits to everything after refusing to leave Jerry and Jess behind. I don't really know why Yoder decided to do this, but whatever. He's turned full bad guy and throws a grenade at them. And then he heads back up to the elevator, the grenade explodes and breaks the glass, but they manage to make it back to the control room in time. Now they're stuck in this room that's also apparently flooding, so they have no choice but to swim out of there. Niemeyer had mentioned a cave system that led to the outside, but they need to get past the Mosa. Luckily for them, they at least have scuba gear to help them out, and even luckier, Jess just happens to know how to use them because of some family bullshit, whatever, I don't care. Anyways, we go through yet another sequence that was actually pretty fun to play through. You have to dodge and sneak past the Mosa to avoid getting eaten, and you do this by going through multiple obstacles. It's actually really fun to watch, and even reminds me of that deleted scene in the Peter Jackson's King Kong movie. After some mishaps, I managed to get them out of there and onto land in no time. They even see the boat from a distance and are skeptical as to why no one is on it. Then all of a sudden Yoder comes out of nowhere and knocks Jerry out. Oh, and in case you're wondering why Yoder is still there, apparently Jess ended up stealing the Barbasol canister, but I didn't even bother mentioning it because I forgot to put it in the script. Anyways, let's continue. Yoder refuses to let them get off the island alive and refuses to leave without the Barbasol canister, but Niemeyer, also being a badass in this game, fights off Yoder. You take over as Niemeyer and press a bunch of buttons to dodge hits and punch Yoder, but because I was was playing on an Xbox controller, a controller that I'm not familiar with, I got my ass kicked. Luckily for us, Rexy decides to once again make her signature last-minute entrance, and everyone is forced to play the mannequin challenge, until Jerry tests Yoder's greediness by kicking the canister towards the edge of the dock, where Yoder is compelled to follow it and catch it before falling into the ocean. But he pays the price for that as Rexy brutally devours him. With him out of the way, we have to deal with the T-Rex, and we get another really fun and awesome sequence where we're moving really fast, so we have to have a quick reaction to avoid death. The way everything is choreographed in this part really makes me appreciate the effort that was at least put into this final mission. Hell, we're even given the decision that determines what ending we get, which is the option to save Jess or the Barbasol canister that Yoder dropped after being eaten by the T-Rex. You can probably guess what I decided to go for. The canister, obviously. Who cares about Jess? I'm just kidding, I have morals, even in video games. Yeah, I decided to save Jess, and the canister gets crushed by the T-Rex. And while Jess and Niemeyer make their way to the boat and get us started, Jerry has to try to outrun Rexy in a very intense play where I had to constantly press X and press right until he finally makes a jump for it on the boat. I'm pretty sure I broke the X button on my brother's Xbox controller, but it was worth it, even though Niemeyer didn't get the money she needed for her and her daughter, but Jess points out a huge stack of cash in a bag that belonged to the contact. With obtaining the money and having survived Jurassic Park, we can finally end this game on a happy note. Anyways, credits roll, we can all go home now. So what do I think of this game overall? Honestly, I don't know how I found any enjoyment in this game when I played it for the first time. I know that sounds pretty extreme, but seriously, this game lacks in so many areas, and I can see why it received mixed reviews when it first came out. Over time, I think people have warmed up to this game and have pretty much accepted its imperfections, which is fine and all, but that's not going to stop me from pointing them out. My main issue with this game has to be with the poor decision-making system. While the game makes it seem like you're in control of the decisions and actions of these characters, you know, letting you choose what they get to say, choosing which way they get to go, and so on, in reality, the game has a set direction it wants you to follow, and all of the options it gives you lead to nowhere else but that set direction. Seriously, there are points of the game where it gives you options to do or say something, but will completely disregard it and make you choose through the options of dialogue and directions until you choose the one the game wants you to pick. For example, there is a part where you play as Oscar during the whole stealth mode mission, and the game gives you the option to go upstairs to the enclosure or under the railings. But even if you want to go upstairs, the game says, nah fam, and basically makes you choose to go under the railings, even if you didn't want to. I know that might be more of a minor example, but there's a lot of these riddled throughout the game. It's like, why give me the option if you weren't going to let me do it in the first place? It's like talking to my parents when I was 15. And this really does take away from the game, since it never really branches out to any alternative storylines, which is something that I remember the later Walking Dead games did. There was a certain point in that game in which you did have the option to kill off a certain character, which would have been good for you in the short term, but letting said character live would have been more beneficial for you in the long term. And that's what I really don't like about Jurassic Park. It doesn't have any consequences like these. The devs were so focused on that set direction that they didn't even try to branch out with alternative storylines in certain parts of the game. Like, there isn't an alternative story if Oscar managed to survive the raptors, or if you didn't make a deal with Yoder. It would have been really cool if they had done this, because these actions would have given us multiple endings with completely different and unique scenarios. And let me tell you about the endings that we do have. We only have two, and they're considered the good and the bad ending. And you would think that with all the decisions that we made during our dialogue and action-based sequences, that they would somehow affect the ending in any way. It doesn't. The only thing that actually determines what ending you get is at the very end on the final mission, where you play as Niemeyer and you have to choose whether to save the Barbasol canister or Jess during the T-Rex attack. From here it pretty much comes down to morals, since if you pick the canister you picked money over a human life, so that means you must die for being heartless. But if you choose to save Jess over the canister, then the game rewards you with a happy ending, but at the cost of you losing that money. And while I made that decision because I like happy endings, I would just like to argue that I do in fact think that Jess is expendable. But those are the only endings we're given, which, taking everything I just said about the decision making in this game, it all feels very lazy and takes away from the replay value. No alternative storylines, only two endings, and pointless decision making are the biggest reasons why you would never really go back to play this game again. There's just no reason to. I mean, maybe there's little things here and there that you could find out and pretty much uncover, but other than that, there's just, again, no reason to replay this game. That's just my opinion, but, you know, if you guys found enough enjoyment to replay it, then that's you. But for me personally, I just can't really find any reason to. And to make things worse, we're giving characters that are just extremely annoying. Don't get me wrong, we have some good characters like Oscar and Niemeyer, and even Jerry at times. All of these characters have annoying aspects to them, but no one is worse than Jess. Jess has to be the worst character in the game. She's very annoying and has the worst dialogue, so much so that there were parts where I just couldn't help but cringe at whatever she was saying. The worst parts were when she and Jerry would get into their argument, which was just painful to watch most of the time. Jerry himself is okay, but in my opinion he really shines as a character during his debate with Dr. Sorkins. You know, about the whole lysine contingency gene. That whole sequence was fun to watch, as it reminded me of the table scene from the original Jurassic Park movie. And even though Dr. Sorkins looks like a Karen who wants to complain to the InGen manager, she brings up some good points, and this is when I like her character best. Then she turns bad and crazy and becomes annoying when she doesn't get her way, just like a Karen would. Yoder starts off good, but then turns bad when he gets greedy. I guess they just needed a bad guy in the movie and a mad scientist Karen wasn't enough. So they got a young and dumb money-hungry guy to fill in that gap. Don't really know what to say about his character, he was alright I guess. Oscar and Niemeyer are the only true redeemable characters in this game. Oscar took out a raptor, he's a badass. That's all I need to say about him. And Niemeyer had the most development as a character in the game, since she's seen as a bad guy in the beginning for doing the same thing Nedry was doing in the movie, but unlike Nedry, her intentions were good. And that's shown to us throughout the game, especially in the end. And that's another reason why I like her character. The decisions you make for her in the final mission actually matter, and you can choose to have her stay as a bad guy and go for the barbasol canister and die with a bad ending, or choose to have her as a good guy and have a good ending. Wish it was like this for the rest of the other characters, but don't worry, instead we have stiff animation and horrible reactions for them. As far as the animation, models, and textures go, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. The human animations are not as good as the dinosaurs, as not only do they look very stiff and move in very unnatural motions, but the human reactions just look so corny and fake. The dinosaur animation, while also a bit stiff, are really nice along with their designs, colors, and textures. But the island itself is really dark, which gives off this weird, almost unnatural looking contrast between itself and something like the T-Rex. The dinosaur models aren't the best and may not look 100% like the ones from the movie, but I personally have no problem with them. The sound design is a different story though. As great as the soundtrack is for this game, I found the audio cutting out several times throughout, and not only with just the music. Everything, including the people and their dialogue and the dinosaurs, the ambience and the sound effects would all just go quiet randomly. But luckily, it was only temporary. But still, it got pretty annoying, especially when the characters were in the middle of a conversation. And I did want to hear what they were saying, since the story is the most entertaining part of this game. Yeah, there are parts throughout where the gameplay is genuinely fun and intense and challenging, like the whole sequence with Oscar versus the Velociraptor, but there are a lot of boring moments filled with you just investigating your surroundings and pointing out the obvious. Honestly, not the best gameplay in my book, but the story itself is pretty good and holds up the continuity well with the characters, InGen, and certain aspects of the park and the dinosaurs. The game also takes time to answer questions people have had about the film, like what happened with the barbasol canister and why was the lysine contingency gene forgotten. And while this game was seen as a platform to be canonical to the movies, Colin Trevorrow himself has said that this game is really only considered to be a soft canon to the movies. And there are some plot holes the game has, like the physical appearance of Jerry Harding, and the T-Rex somehow still being in the visitor center and breaking out of the main entrance, showing that it clearly doesn't fit through that. So there is no way it used it as a way to get in during the whole T-Rex versus fight scene in the original movie. Taking everything into consideration, I personally think this game stands at around a 6 out of 10. It's not the absolute worst dinosaur game I've ever played, and it does have some good to it, like a strong story with pretty good continuity, along with a great soundtrack and decent dinosaur models. With that said, everything else is just not that good or is simply okay to me. And that was my official very long review of Jurassic Park the game. I'm not even joking, this video took a very long time to make, and it was a little stressful at times, but I finished it and I'm really happy that I have it here up on the channel. And yeah, I mean, the reviews aren't going to slow down. I'm definitely going to have another review out, hopefully by the end of this month. I'm not really going to focus on trying to get it out at a certain time. These last couple of reviews I've been trying to get out at a specific time. With Ark, I try to get it out on June 2nd on its 20th anniversary, and Jurassic Park on, June 11th for its 27th anniversary. But this next review, I'm not going to have a specific time or date set out for it to be released, so I'm going to really take my time on this next one. And while I'm not going to reveal what it is, trust me, you'll definitely want to sink your teeth into it if you know what I mean. But yeah, if you guys made it this far into the video, then please leave a like, because this video did take me a very long time to make, and I'm very, very, very tired, and it would just be greatly appreciated. But anyways guys, if you enjoyed this review, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Jurassic Park content and the cool dinosaur stuff I post on this channel. That's all I have to say for now guys. Thank you so much for watching, and please have a nice day.